Just so you know, everybody, that you are being recorded, and I thought we would do it in the fashion that I'm basically gonna allow you to ask questions, and the panel will answer as best they can. And I'm gonna repeat your questions in case they are unclear or anything else. So, who would like to go first? It's just a matter of hands, so who's quickest? No, nobody has any questions? Okay, there we go. Thank you.
I thought I needed a microphone.
No, you just shout it out.
Yeah, okay.
I'll repeat the question if
Yeah, I think the part with you drawing how to not draw Scrooge was one of the best moments, although I didn't really get the point. So I just wanted to know.
You go ahead.
It looked so realistic for me still. So I thought, what is even though it's very interesting.
But that's not how a cartoonist draws. You're supposed to do it freehand, not the way I did it. That's why it would take me so incredibly long. But that's the only way I know how to draw, is like an engineer draws. I always thought I was a pretty good cartoonist for an engineer, but I mean, I just would construct Scrooge McDuck like it was a bridge and lives depended on it. That's not the way to draw. That's constantly why I tell a few people who come and ask me for advice on cartooning. I said, I'm not qualified to give advice. I don't even like my own art. I like what I try to do, but I never like what I achieve. And I say, I mean, if you have any hope of doing this professionally, art directors hated my artwork. Everything about it was wrong. It was stiff. It was too detailed. It's fan art. That's why I have. I mean, I know that's why I have a certain popularity with a certain percentage of the readers, because I was never a professional. I was a fan artist. And that's very, very popular now on the internet. The internet's filled with fan art. And that's all I ever was. That's all I ever wanted to be, was a fan artist. But you can't make a profession, because you've got to. I would have never been published if I hadn't started with that little tiny publisher in America. And like it said, that was the only person who wanted to do duck comics. So they didn't have any choice but to let me do it. But if they hadn't published those, and then Egmont, I didn't even know, was reprinting some of these. I mean, you know, when you do work for one Disney publisher, it's available for free to any other Disney publishers. So my stories were being used in Europe. I had no idea, and so they would have never hired me at the huge European publishers. But since it was free, they tried. I think first a 4-page strip. Just tested it in a Christmas issue, and then the fans liked that weird fan artist, and so they tried another one and another one. So it's another interesting story for another time, how I stumbled into working went from the smallest Disney publisher in the world to the biggest Disney publisher in the world within 2 years. But that's only because I started with the small publisher, and the big publisher tested it, and that's certain. But the art directors always hated my art, and I don't blame them. And I think Disney, the very little input Disney had into any of this. Disney has nothing to do with the writing or the drawing or anything, but sometimes they'll kibitz. And at some point I was told that Disney contacted Egmont and said, no more Don Rosas. You can't stop him now, but no more. So you didn't understand the point. That's just not the way you're supposed to draw. A real artist a real cartoonist learns how to draw quickly and efficiently and tell the story with as few lines as possible so he can get it done. Because we get paid by the page. The faster you can get the page done, the more money you make. I had the opposite intent. The slower I could get the page done, the more entertaining it was to fans. I never worried about how much it paid. I figured my wife would take care of me. She had a job.
Yes, the gentleman up there.
The first Don Rosa comic I read was set in Finland,
and involves a lot of historical research. How do you, what research, what part of history makes sense in the Duck universe, and how do you make that history, as the history professor pointed out, resonate with the reader and with the universe in which it is being used?
Well, now it seems like you were one of the people who think this is a fantasy universe of talking ducks. To me, it's the real world, so that's why it works. It's the real world. The only difference in my comics, or to me the Barks comics, from the real world is the top third of California is another state called Calisota, which was comes from the Barks comics, but it's the real world. Now, the Kalevala story, that's been popular. The reason I did that story was these Barks ducks are very popular in all over Europe, Italy, especially northern Europe, especially Norway, but most of all in Finland. You can't in Europe, anybody who reads comics would know who I am because I do the Barks ducks, and the Barks ducks are most famous. Maybe not. I mean, people who don't even like my work know who I am because I'm do this bad art on these Karl Barks comics. But in Finland, everybody in the country knows who I am, literally. You can imagine how surreal that is to me. When back home, my neighbors don't even know who I am. But in the country of Finland, every single living person knows who I am because even people who don't read comics, when I go there, they put me on the front page of the newspaper. They put me on the TV talk, the live network TV talk shows. And people who don't even read comics, so they turn on the TV and say, "Oh, it's that damn Don Rosa again." But I mean, imagine me on national television, front page of the newspaper. My wife sees some of these things on YouTube, and she says, "Well, you're so relaxed. You're on national television. You're so relaxed." Well, I couldn't do that in America. I mean, but I just treat this European thing. It's too surreal. I just pretend it's a joke. I've always felt. I say this, and it's true. I've always felt like when I come to Europe and suddenly I go from nobody to national hero, it's an enormous practical joke that entire countries are part of. So they want me to think, let's trick him again. But the reason I did that story was, like I said, Finland, the stories are so popular. And after I visited 2 or 3 times, they said, you know, if you combine the 2 most important aspects of Finnish culture, which would be Aku Anka, Donald Duck, and the Kalevala, which is their national epic poem, you'd be elected president. And I said, well, that'd be interesting, because I knew in Finland they always got write-in votes for Donald Duck. So I honestly wanted to know if they got write-in votes for Don Rosa that year. I thought it would be really interesting to have a totally incompetent person in charge of an entire country. But I knew that could never happen. I don't want to talk about that anymore.
I saw a hand up there earlier as well.
Yeah, so I've always enjoyed intensely reading your stories and the flow of them, but watching this, it sort of left me with a question. Are there any stories that you would have wanted to get out, but you didn't feel you could get away with? Or any stories you, looking back, you wanted to tell in a different way?
Oh, yeah, I thought, I didn't know I was going to quit when I did, and I always thought eventually I wanted to do the Son of the Sun again with better artwork, and when I look at that, I can't imagine anybody ever published that. I like the story, but the artwork was so bad. But at some point, I just couldn't take it anymore, that system, and I think I kept a list of ideas, and I think the last story I did, I think I'd used up just all the really good ideas. Probably at some point I just stopped writing down new ideas. Towards the end, I was really sick of it. Just not that I didn't love Barks's characters anymore, but the system would just wore me down. The frustrations overpowered me. I just couldn't handle it anymore. But one of the many reasons I quit, and you can't name any single one of them, but was one of the final stories in that list It was what I turned into the one called The Prisoner of White Agony Creek, which was the month that Barks told about Scrooge kidnapping Glittering Goldie to work his claim in the Yukon. And after I finished that, I thought, I'm never going to love a story that I do as much as I love that one. And I just thought, that's a good time to quit. What did you, how many stories were left? There were two stories that one of them people always wanted me to tell, which, because I used to love doing origin stories or untold stories, because I grew up on Superman comics of the 50s and 60s, and they always did untold stories about the origin of green kryptonite or the origin of the bottle city of Cantor. So I loved that. They wanted me to tell the search for Huey, Dewey, and Louie's parents. And I thought about that long and hard, and there were 4 endings to the story. The first ending was that they went in search of their parents and they didn't find them. Okay, there's no point to that. The second possibility is they went in search of their parents and they found out they were dead. There's no point to that. The third possibility is they went in search of their parents and they found them and they went to live with their parents. I can't do that. They have to stay with Uncle Donald. And the fourth possibility is they went in search of their parents and they found them and they stayed living with Uncle Donald. Well, then there'd be lawsuits and lots of unpleasantness. So there was no ending to that story. And the other story, since you're asking, is that I might have gotten around to, but nobody would have ever published it, was the death of Scrooge. Not really a death of Scrooge, but it would be fashioned after Alan Moore's Death of Superman story that about 1985, sometime around there, when the first reboot of Superman came along, when they could tell that it was too old-fashioned a character and readers just weren't reading it anymore, but they knew in those days there were still people like me that loved the original Superman, so they had Alan Moore write something really unusual for Alan Moore. It's just a very touching, sweet, 2-part story where they concluded all of the outstanding subplots and of the Superman legend, and they were ending the Superman story for old readers like me. And then they knew that John Byrne could just create something altogether new. And I would have liked to have done that story. And of course, at the end, he doesn't die. He fakes his death like Superman did, and Superman went to Clark Kent went to live with Lois Lane, and of course, Scrooge would go to live with Glittering Goldie in the Yukon.
Oh, the gentleman over here had a question first, but I can see your hand up there.
It's quite a specific story question. When Scrooge is in the Yukon and is captured and his mother dies and goes into a rampage, you change the narrative into hearsay and rumor. And I was quite curious why you do that. Is it because he almost become superpowered in that bit?
First, I didn't change it. That's how I envisioned it from the beginning, and I never had any control over how they translated or colored the stories in the weekly children's version. So I got some flack from European readers who thought I was changing him into a superhero because they knew I'm an American and they think, oh, Americans love these superheroes. And I don't. I mean, I love the old-fashioned superheroes of the 40s and 50s. But it was always supposed to be colored in sepia. It was supposed to switch. And then if you read my original script, you can clearly tell that this is not really happening. It's the story that people told. And maybe a lot of it's true, maybe a lot of it's not true. But so if you think it was I'm not sure if you think that I changed that story through the years. It's only because, about 12 years ago, I trademarked my name when I quit. And I got tired of seeing editors who didn't really care about the work, just changing it, coloring it wrong, lettering it wrong, changing my script and things like that. So now when they put my name on the cover, it has to be exactly the way I envisioned it, and that's when I had to change back to the original. Then, of course, there's some publishers who don't want to, like Professor Peary up there works for a publisher. I'm surprised he was in this movie. They don't want to deal with me. They don't want to get permission to use my name, so they just publish the Picsou magazine in France. Constantly uses my stories and my covers, but they can't mention my name. And sometimes they get snotty and they say, here's another story about a guy whose name we can't mention. They could if they just simply ask my permission. That's all they have to do. But some Disney publishers are just too arrogant to ever ask anything from a writer and artist, because the writers and artists just aren't significant to them. It's their magazine. So yeah, I'd never changed that narrative. It just wasn't used the way I wanted it to until I could force it to be used that way.
And then we actually have a question from the camera guy.
My question is, there is a discussion between you and Jekyll in the movie where you are talking about the question about whether you would want to see your stories adapted on cinema, and you say.
I think that, yeah, he asked me a question, and whether I slobbered or something when I was answering it and you cut that part out. I think the part that I didn't answer was what year the story should be set in?
No.
Oh, that part interested me.
Yes, that part was in the movie, but what I will ask is you don't want to see your stories adapted because you don't like Disney, but
Right.
what I ask you is, if Disney was not in this business with Scrooge, would you like to see your stories adapted?
Gosh, yes, if they would sell the rights to Amblin Entertainment or something, or anybody, to Morgan, anybody but Disney.
Can I call dibs, please?
Yeah, it's not that I wouldn't be. God, I'm a movie buff, even more than a comic fan. To see that story and to see Barks's characters made that popular it would have to be live animation though. It wouldn't. I mean, live action. I wouldn't want to see them animated because they're not talking ducks. I'd like to see, or maybe stop motion animation might be good. But
yes,
yeah, it's only because if it was any of this was made, it would be made by Disney. And they wouldn't even have to bother to tell me they were doing it, because it's all their property. Which I always knew that was never a problem for me. My problem was when I started finding out after about 10 years that people were putting my name on the cover and still publishing wretchedly bad versions of my stories. That's what bothered me. I knew I'd never get wealthy off of it, but I didn't think I'd be embarrassed by it.
Okay, then I have a question then to follow up on that. Now, the Disney characters aren't your own, and you realize that, of course. But what about Part Willoughby as an action movie or animated movie or anything like that?
Yeah, people have for years said, and they knew I wasn't happy with that Disney situation. They said, but now you've made a name for you. You've been noticed. Karl Barks's stories are popular enough that you got noticed, and now we'll publish anything you want to produce. And I'd say, well, whether it's Part Willoughby that I invented 30 years ago or something new I came up with last week or next week, I didn't grow up with those characters. They don't mean anything to me. It's Barks's characters that mean something. That's the only thing that means anything to me. I want to use his characters, and plus the other thing is, you saw how telling stories just to myself was a compulsion my entire life, ever since I was my earliest memory. And through, like my friend Ray Fouché was saying, I did it in high school, I did it in college for the new comic strips. I did it, I was running a construction company, but still in the evenings I'd write and draw comic strips for the fanzines. I had a compulsion to tell these comic stories. And people say, well, you quit 12 years ago now, don't you miss that? I don't miss it a bit, because the system so totally destroyed my enthusiasm that I don't miss it at all. I just want to be a fan like I was before and grow chili peppers and keep collecting old comics and getting better version Blu-ray discs of my favorite movies and traveling around the world visiting duck fans. That's all I want to do now. I'll never, and people say, oh, he'll do it eventually. I see that on the Facebook page, and people say, oh, wait, he'll do it eventually. And that's about the only time I'll send a message in. I'll say, just abandon ye hope. Just don't think about it. I'm not going to do it.
Wow, that gave a lot of hands. Who wants to fight for it? No, okay.
Yes. I think they talked about it in the when I knew I'd outgrown these childish stories, and I just dumped them all in the.
You mentioned two.
Yeah. Those were the two I loved the most that I couldn't part with my issues, and I hid them in a bottom drawer in a back room. But I love those. The Only a Poor Old Man, and I had no idea it was the first Uncle Scrooge story, but that's what Barks was doing, was putting extra emotion into the development of the character. And then the other one, which was his greatest historical treasure hunt for the Golden Helmet. Those are my two favorites, but I mean, I could go on and on and on and on. And, like the first, it boggles my mind with how great the first like 20 issues of the American Uncle Scrooge comics are. All Carl Barks stories, of course.
We had some more hands up there, and you were first, sir. Oh, you? Yep, at the front.
Don, how is it meeting up your fans in the events and so on in the world?
You can't imagine. It's like I was saying before. It's surreal. It's what made me do that job an extra 15 years. It was so frustrating, but I got so much appreciation from European fans that it was like a duty. I felt like it was a sacred duty. I had to keep doing this, and I also had to visit them because there's so many other artists who speak only Spanish, or they're down in South America. Or but I could speak English, sort of a universal language, and I was willing to travel and lose out. That's one of the funny things. Pretty soon, and within 10 years, I was invited to go on these promotional tours to promote magazines and books that I didn't get paid a royalty on. Why would I do that? Because I loved meeting Duck fans, and they knew I was a sucker. I was really exploited because of that. But as soon as I said stop doing this, they were just waiting for me to. So they're not going to say anything until I say, well, you got to stop exploiting me like this. But I realized finally that the people whose work wasn't so important or so popular, they stayed home and they kept working. So as a result, that my stories were so popular, I was making less money than the people whose stories were less popular. So, but meeting fans, I'll tell you, the only the thing that really sometimes annoys me, as much as it's so lovely, and I don't just get, like I think it mentioned in there, I don't get people who just say, "Oh, it was a great story." They say, "Oh, bless you." Somebody should write maybe form a book out of some of the letters I get now from people in their 20s and 30s. It's such touching stories. A lot of them, like I did, had an unhappy childhood, and they say your stories were such an important time. And this one girl in Oslo showed me. She said something she didn't explain, but she said she'd had a really terrible time in her young life, and reading my comics got her through it, and so she had D-U-C-K tattooed right here. I think so nobody would know it was there but her or something. But things like that happen all the time. But the funny part, aside from all that corny stuff, the funny part is when they show me, for instance, the 1997 Life of Scrooge edition, and then there's a brand new, by the way, Danish Life of Scrooge edition, and the old one is hideous. It's colored wrong. It's lettered wrong. They don't use the same. They don't even use the right art. They don't have the right sound effects. They don't use my right script. It's so bad. And there's a new edition, and people will come to me and they'll have the old edition signed, and I'll say, "Oh, you need to get the new edition." And they'll say, "No, I like this one." And I'll say, "But the new edition's recolored, and the sound effects are right, and it's using my script. It's much, much better." No, they like this one. Then I start to get pissed. I say, "Look, I'm the guy who wrote and drew it. I'm telling you this is better." No, I like this one. And then I want to choke them. But I say, "I'll sign this for you, but you have to promise me someday you'll at least, if you like this, imagine if you looked at it the way it's supposed to be. Please look at it." No, I like this one. And I really get mad. But they think I can tell they're offended. They think I'm telling them to get rid of it. No, I appreciate. I've still got that Uncle Scrooge, that first Uncle Scrooge story, has my sister's name written on it. I've still got that. It's in a plastic sleeve propped up in my comic vault. I would never get rid of that, but it's not printed very well, and it was printed much better. I've got much better editions, but I'd never get rid of that. I don't want them to get rid of that, the issue they grew up with. I just want them to know it sucks. It's just not right. But they said, look, I like that one. I understand nostalgia.
Sounds like you and George Lucas have something in common. Yes, the gentleman at the back. You've been waiting a long time.
Do you still draw and make other kinds of comics or art for your own entertainment?
No, I told you, I don't draw. The only time I draw now is to make a fan happy. I never liked drawing. It's tedious, it's manual labor, and I don't think I do it well. It would just frustrate me, but it's how I could tell us. I had to do it to tell the story. Now I never draw. I hate it more than ever, but it makes just this quick scribbles, and you saw the way I actually would draw with templates, and everything would be plotted out like an engineer. Now I've trained myself to do faces in a fairly quick and efficient way, and I'm not completely embarrassed by them, and it makes people so happy, and I'll never get tired of doing that. But as far as just sitting around drawing like I used to, no, never.
And then we have the gentleman right at the front.
Is your favorite superhero Superman, and do you see any resemblance between Superman and Scrooge McDuck?
Every once in a while I get a totally new question. My favorite superhero, I'd have to think for a while, but Superman probably would be that. I mean, the Superman up to 1985 when John Byrne took it over. Or maybe up to about 1975. The next 10 years were pretty bad. I mean, I got rid of every one of my comic books from I have virtually, I like to brag about it. I don't think people know. I've got one of the biggest comic book collections in America. I've got like every comic book, not just Disney comic books from the late 40s. I had them all the way to 1985. But at a point, it's been nearly 10 years ago now, I got rid of 1970 to 1985. Because that was when American comic books were just going off I didn't like anything there. It's all the violent superheroes. I could see it developing. I like the superheroes, the Marvels and everything from 65 to 70, or 60 to 70, but Superman comics, I still have a real soft spot for Superman comics, but only of the 50s and the early 60s. But there's so many. Is the Spirit a superhero? I don't know. He's a masked crime fighter. I love Eisner's Spirit. I don't know. I don't even know what comics. I haven't seen American comics for 30 years now. And once you see what's published in Europe, you're pretty damned embarrassed by American comics, especially what they have in France and Belgium.
And then we had a question from a gentleman up here, and I'm thinking, because we have to wrap up soon, that if anybody actually has any questions for the camera crew and about the movie, that would be absolutely fantastic. They came here especially for this event, all the way from France, for this world premiere, actually. I hope you have questions.
Let me say a couple of things that I want people to know. This was really nice. My favorite interview that I saw here was Don Murphy's. He really made me feel nice. He saw the enthusiasm I had as a fan is what drove him and what drove me. But the other things I thought that Morgan did real well was I couldn't help but notice that you don't see my whole face until the end of the movie. It's very bright. But the other thing is all the people that were speaking in other languages, they speak excellent English. But that wouldn't have seemed international if they'd have been speaking English. Because all of them, every single one of them, speak better English. Because I know all those folks. They speak better English with better pronunciation and a bigger vocabulary than my neighbors in Kentucky. Everybody laughs. That's true. Because they learned English in school. And Kentuckians learn English from other Kentuckians. That's one of the things I always told the publishers. That you're so damn lucky that I grew up on television. I don't talk like I come from Kentucky because I was taught English by television. I didn't have friends. But if I had a Kentucky accent, I'd be very difficult to understand by people who really know English. But yes,
can you try it out?
I'd be embarrassed that I probably couldn't do it right.
All right, I saw that hand first. Sorry, sir.
How you pick which people to interview? How did I imagine there had to be a lot? So,
Yes.
So how did you? Do
Well, we did a couple of things. First, I sent an email to Don to ask him if he knew anyone that was inspired by his stories, and he sent me some names. And then what I did is that we had, as Don Murphy did, actually a message board, a website where people could contact us and say, oh, I did this, and then we looked at everything that was the most different as possible as what Don Rosa did with his story. So we didn't want any comic writer, comic book artist, because that was already embodied by Don Rosa. So when I heard there was an Icelandic Angry Birds programmer, like, oh gosh, good. Then I heard there was the producer of Transformers. It's like, what's the connection? So all those people, as much as we went, was to get people who were the furthest away from the comic book industry. There's actually more people we interviewed that were cut from the film because it's already very long. But we decided to go with the people that were the furthest away. And in part 2, actually on Sunday, we're interviewing Tuomas Holopainen from Finland. And we're also having Dennis Tepe, who did a full model of the comic bin in Lego. And that is amazing. And we're very proud to have him in this, because sadly he passed away before the production started, but we had 2 production companies that interviewed him before, and so we got the images and it's going to be in the film, and we're very proud of that. So yeah, that's how we did.
Yes, sir.
What inspired you to make this documentary in the first place?
That's a good question. Well, I was a Duck fan, and I try to go on tours following Don Rosa, as I say in the beginning.
How long you been working on it? I've been following me around for about 10 years.
Well, stalker. Yeah, I am a stalker. That is exactly what I am. So what happened?
Technically, yeah.
What happened was that I couldn't get into some of the events because it was booked. You all know it is. All the tickets were flown away, on the first hour or 2 hours that Don Rosa was announced. So I was, trying to figure out how to get to him, and there was my camera on my desk. I was like, well, I'm a director. Why shall I just call the place and say, can I come with my camera? And they allowed that. So I did a little snippet. Don't try this at home, kids. And they let me in, and I was, filming, and then I was like, oh, well, I have footage now. Why don't I do something with that? And I did some little clips, some little stuff that I posted online, and Don Rosa saw it, and he very, very nicely sent me an email to say, why don't you come in, and if you want to bring your camera, you can. And I said no. I'll show you the email. And why did I say no? Because I wanted to do something bigger. I didn't want to do Morgan goes on vacation and shows Don Rosa, because nobody would care. So I decided to do this. I wrote the documentary for a year. I submitted the general concept to Don, who generously said, yeah, whatever, I'm up for it.
If you wanted to do only about me, I probably
Yeah.
would have been interested. But you told me it was about other Duck fans. That was nice.
Well, because the main idea at the same time, Tuomas Holopainen did his album, music inspired by Scrooge Mystery Adventures, or the life and times of Scrooge. And I discovered I was not alone in being a fan and wanting to do creative stuff with it. And that's when I realized there was so many other people that wanted to do that. And when I approached Don, I said, well, my film is about what it is to be a fan. What's the line between fan art and art? What's the line between just being a fanboy and an artist? And I think that's, I don't know if we succeeded, but that's exactly what we're trying to achieve with the film. At the end, you can apply it to anything, to any fandom. If you're a fan of something, you can create something that has a meaning for you, and that's all that matters. And part 2 of the film explains how, I'm gonna spoil it, how the fans actually, make the character more alive, and how that's, it's a community that is driven by the fans. Whereas people would think it's just childish literature and it's just the kids reading it. No, it's fans all over the world that reads the comics, do stuff, do drawings, do sculptures, do all that kind of things.
You probably know about all the fan art on the internet about Glittering Goldie and Scrooge of the Yukon, and they show exactly what happened in that cabin in great detail. I've seen them; they're nice, and they're right. But there's all sorts of fan art, especially about Glittering Goldie.
It's not in part 2. That'll be part 3.
Well, as you have already had a question, we have the gentleman over there.
All right, you forgot me. This is for Don. I just want one tiny thing. Can you reveal a little about your meeting with Box? What did he tell you?
I knew that Karl Barks can't figure people like me out, and I'm getting the same experience, but with greater understanding. He never intended to be so important to so many millions of people's lives. He just wanted to entertain them for 10 minutes, and he can't figure out people like me that are such fans of his comics, and we would make him uncomfortable. And even though I understand that, I still get kind of uncomfortable when people come to me and say, "Oh, they love my comics." I say, "Well, thank you." And I met somebody online discussing your comics, and we got married. And, oh, that's nice. And they say, "Oh, and my parents, I love your historical adventures so much that I became a history major." And I'm thinking, well, their parents probably want them to be a doctor or a lawyer, but they're a history major with all the economic opportunities that represents. So I never intended to impact people's lives like that. It's not even, I can't deal with that yet. I still don't know how to come up against that. But Barks was the same, and I knew he would be uncomfortable, and he didn't want to hear all that stuff from me. So we talked about the weather, and we talked about his other art, and talked about his National Geographic collection, and I think there's somebody was filming this. Somebody like Morgan was filming because Barks wanted me to meet him because there'd been so much bad blood between Barks's so-called business managers who were trying to discredit me because they stupidly saw some threat to his heritage or something. But he sued them and got rid of them. And but there was somebody filming us, and at some point during this afternoon, I'm sitting there talking to somebody else about comics, and just having a small talk, and there's this old guy walking in the background watering plants. It was Barks. I mean, it was such a low-key meeting. And then when we were all leaving, I lagged behind a little bit. And I never like to tell this part because I get choked up, and I just turned to him and I said, "You know how important you are in my life." And I know he didn't have to talk about that. And I said, "But you know how important you are." And he nodded, and then I left. So it was nothing fabulous. People always think it was like a great meeting, or it was just nice.
And I think that on that note, perhaps that we should wrap up the session. I know Don has a dinner later this evening. I think his publisher is ready to go, maybe? I don't know. One more question? One more, says the boss man. Okay.
Oh gosh.
Okay, Don, do you want to pick the person? I see so many hands now, I'm not even sure I should do anything.
You can tell, I never look at people, and if I look, I'll look at one person. That's how I do it, signings. They have to have the line, so I can't see the line. I just want to see one person. So you,
sir.
No question. I just want to say thank you very much, Mr. Rosa, for those fantastic stories about Scrooge McDuck. We really love your stories. Thanks.
as one of the organizers of Art Bubble, I would be amiss if I didn't say that you can meet Don again during the weekend at the Round Tower between 10 and 6, both Saturday and Sunday. And Don, it was a real pleasure having you here. And
well, I've never experienced anything like this. I've experienced some pretty interesting things in the last 30 years. Nothing like this. A corker.
Morgan, Laura, and I know you're Danish, but I can't remember your name.
Franklin.
Franklin. It doesn't sound very Danish.
No.
And as well, thank you all for coming. Thank you to Cinemateket for hosting this event. And should I do the reveal, Morgan? Yeah. Okay. If you didn't get enough, Morgan is still working on the first clip, and it will be screened on December 22nd. There, 28th? 20th? Was it 22nd? 20th. Okay. December 20th. Make sure you don't make my mistake. So on the 20th, and I don't think Morgan will be back, but we might have some of this footage around that screening as well. This has been for Art Bubble TV, and if any of you feel any sort of inclination to speak into the camera when you're leaving, go do it. Fine. All in any means. Either Morgan will use it, or his cameraman will use it, or we will use it. So thank you all for coming, and thank you.